Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neuroscience for Numpties. I'm your host, Joe, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day. So last time I left you guys off on a little bit of a cliffhanger. I was going to talk about pre-crime. Now, that's not the official term for it. That is actually a term that I've taken from the movie Minority Report, starring Tom Cruise. In real life, this is an anti-terrorism procedure that was developed in 2011. And that's the paper I'm going to be covering today. So I'm very excited to share it with you guys. It's one of my favorite publications in the field. But before we jump into that, I want to cover a few housekeeping points. And let me get my laser pointer going. There we go. Okay. All right, housekeeping. First of all, the channel is growing. Yay. Very exciting. I am planning to start some social media. I'm for sure going to start a Twitter for the channel. I'm thinking I'm going to post that maybe like after the winter holidays. And I don't know if I'm going to make other social media accounts for Neuroscience for Numpties, like on Instagram or Facebook, but I will think on it. I will for sure do the Twitter though. The benefit to subscribing to the social media is that you're going to get content early. I will also be notifying you every time that the videos are posted, so that's going to go on the social media accounts, but you're also going to see some of the behind the scenes stuff. So like, what are the ideas going into the videos, and also ideas for future seasons, which, spoiler alert, I'm going to give you guys a tease for season 2 right now, since we're actually more than halfway through season 1 at this point. In season 2, I'm actually going to cover something called brain-computer interfaces. This is an extremely cool, like almost science fiction type of research. Like if you think brainwave-based lie detection sounds like science fiction, this stuff blows that out of the water. Brain-computer interfaces, think hands-free technology. Think like Elon Musk is working on Neuralink, for example. Think about like communicating with your computer without even touching the keyboard or using a mouse or anything, just thinking and the computer responds. That's brain-computer interface. Most of this technology these days is actually used in cases of severe paralysis. So it's obviously like not necessarily available to the general public. People who have complete locked-in syndrome are completely paralyzed, and they need help communicating with their friends and family, and especially the doctors, right? To communicate what their needs are. Are they hungry? Are they sad? Or are they, stressed? Things like that. The computer would give them a number of options, so like icons, for example, to say I'm hungry or I'm tired. And then the computer is going to read their brain signals, and it's going to select the appropriate image based on those signals. And so one of the really cool applications that I learned about recently for brain-computer interfaces and helping people who are paralyzed, it actually helped, a brain-computer interface helped a paralyzed man play a video game for the first time. He had never played one before, and he played Portal 2, actually, I think is what it was. And so again, hands-free, like no need for a controller, no need for anything. He might have even been wearing a VR headset. So he was basically like in the game world, and he's just thinking, and the game responds and moves him throughout the world and plays the game. So something like that is used in very rare cases these days with, like I said, people who have extreme paralysis. But imagine if this technology became commonplace, and I mean, that could completely revolutionize the world of esports, right? You no longer would you need to touch the keyboard or respond on a mouse. You could just think and your character would act in the game. So very, very cool. There's also, speaking of video games, Cyberpunk 2077, I think recently came out, and that is another like, I see myself kind of talking about things like that in season 2 to bring up like, is that future dystopia that you see, like a world of cyborgs and all this cool stuff, like hacking other people's brains, cool and scary. Could things like that actually come into reality? And so those are some of the conversations we'll be having in season 2. I'm really, really excited for that. I'm also going to be covering neurofeedback. If you don't know what that is, that's very similar. Basically, the computer is reading your brainwaves, but it's actually communicating to you and telling you about what's going on in your brain. So this is actually, it helps people change their brainwaves when they're having, I don't want to call them like dysfunctional brainwaves, but people who have attention deficit disorder, for example, have too much of a particular frequency of brainwave. And so the computer can actually tell them whenever that frequency is like past a certain threshold. And then they can work with the computer to like minimize that frequency, and then it actually improves their attention. So this is actually used, it's relatively common. Neurofeedback is relatively commonly used clinically. I believe it's actually one of the #1 treatments for ADD and ADHD. So even though it sounds like science fiction, it's actually been around for decades, and people actually do use it in treatment. So very cool. That's the type of things I'll be talking about. The last thing I want to cover before we jump into the paper is that we're having our first collaboration with Sarah Olson Mitchell. She is a science writer and book reviewer. She's a kind of Twitter famous, almost 16,000 followers on Twitter. So go follow her and push her over to the 16,000 mark. So she's not a neuroscientist per se, but basically what the idea is that we're going to come in, she can interview me as a neuroscientist, and I can talk to her as a science writer. And we're going to have a live stream on YouTube, and you guys can like come in and ask questions, and we'll have a really great time. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Okay, so let us get down to business. All right. So today I'm covering a paper called A Mock Terrorism Application of the P300-based Concealed Information Test. Now, if you've watched the previous videos, then you'll know that P300 is an electrical signal from the brain called a brainwave. And the Concealed Information Test is a type of deception detection test. And this paper was written by John Meixner and Peter Rosenfeld. I should say they're actually both doctors now, so Dr. Meixner and Dr. Rosenfeld. The Rosenfeld lab is the lab that produces most of this type of research. They're kind of the dominant lab in this field. And John Meixner, a cool note about him is that he's actually both a doctor and he is a lawyer. So, that just kind of increases the authenticity of the experiment, if you will. Okay, so what did they do? Well, again, the high-level question that they were trying to answer was, can we actually stop criminals from committing a crime before they commit it? Again, in cases of terrorism, you don't want to catch the terrorist after they blew up the building. You want to stop them from blowing it up in the first place, right? So very important to national security. Now, in this experiment, they asked college students, excuse me, they asked college students to plan either a terrorist attack or a vacation. And in the case of the terrorist attack, they actually planned which location they were going to attack. It was one of 4 locations in the city of Houston. Don't ask me why it was Houston, but it was. And then they would choose the method of attack. So in this case, the type of bomb. So it could have been like a fire bomb or a gas bomb, maybe electromagnetic bomb. And then they choose the date of the attack. And in this case, it was one of 4 options in the month of July. So I imagine, a lot of the participants might have chosen July 4th since it's a holiday and a lot of people would be out and about at that time, right? And then they were instructed to write a brief to their terrorist leader and explain the rationale behind why they chose everything. Why did you choose that location in Houston, and the type of bomb and the date of the attack, et cetera, et cetera. But keep in mind that none of the mock terrorists, the guilty participants in the experiment, none of them were instructed to memorize anything. This was all kind of natural. They were just putting together a plan for their terrorist leader, and they weren't actually instructed to rehearse anything or to memorize anything. So again, retaining sort of the authenticity of the experiment. Okay, the innocent participants were actually kind of doing something similar, but they were planning a vacation. So again, they're choosing the location of their vacation and the activity they're going to do and the date that they want to go. And then they wrote a letter to their parents kind of explaining this vacation trip and what they were going to do. Okay. Now, in this case, the innocent participants and the guilty participants, one at a time, were sat down in front of a computer. And the computer would then present these images. So for example, it might start with cities like Houston, Detroit, Chicago, San Diego. And in this case, Houston would have been the crime relevant option. Now, of course, if you're innocent, you have no idea about that. But if you are guilty, then you knew that you planned to attack Houston, right? And you guys can ignore this part. This is a target non-target trial. It's just to help people pay attention, so we can ignore that for now. But anyway, so the protocol is going to present these images of cities, to all the participants, and then it's going to move on to the bombs, like firebomb, gas bomb, electromagnetic bomb, etc. And of course, then if the terrorist had planned to use like a firebomb, then their brain would respond to that item differently than the other bombs, right? And the innocent people don't have any response to any of those items, because they have no idea what bomb was going to be used in the crime. And then you do the same thing for dates. And because all 4 dates were in July, then of course July was the month that they were looking for. So they're just presenting months. And yeah, so that's the gist of what they're seeing on the screen. And of course, while they're looking at the screen, they're actually wearing an electroencephalograph, which looks something like this. They have a cap with electrodes and wires feeding into an amplifier, and it's just recording how their brains respond to each image on the screen at the electrical level inside the brain. Okay, now what were the results? Well, first of all, here's a really cool picture. These are actual brainwaves, and in this case, here's the guilty group, here's the innocent group, and what they're actually doing is that they're averaging the electrical activity from all of the people's brains. So there's 12 people, 12 different people in the guilty group. And so these are, this is 12 different people's activity, of their brain activity, averaged into one picture. So that's kind of cool. You're looking at 12 different people's brains here. And you can see the solid line is the crime relevant. These are the crime relevant items, like the method of attack and the date of attack, and etc. And then the dotted line represents the non-crime relevant items. And you can see that for the terrorists, their brains aren't really responding much to the irrelevant details, but they have this huge response to the crime relevant details, right? This big brainwave. And compared to the innocents, everything is irrelevant, so their brains don't respond differently at all to any of those items. So this is pretty much ideal. That's exactly what you would want to see when you're comparing a guilty group with an innocent group. The guilty group has this big response to crime relevant items, but the innocent group does not. So that looks great on paper, but how do they do diagnostically? Well, here's a table. Don't be intimidated by it. I know it looks like a lot, but basically all that you have here, there's 3 different analyses, and they make different assumptions based on what we're assuming law enforcement knows about the crime. So the first 2 analyses here, IAL and IMAX, I won't go into the details. All you need to know is that they're assuming that law enforcement know like what city was going to be attacked, or what the method of attack was, things like that. We're assuming that law enforcement knows what they're looking for, and they're analyzing the data based on that kind of privileged information. And when you assume that, you can actually see, so this is the guilty group, and then that's the innocent group. They're calling 12 out of 12 people guilty, and they're calling none of the innocent people guilty. So that's perfect accuracy. That's 100% accuracy for the IAL analysis and for the IMAX analysis. I mean, you can't get any better than that. So this test is working wonderfully. It couldn't be any better. And keep in mind that, the guilty people here, they didn't actually commit a crime. They only planned the terrorist attack. They didn't actually do it. And yet we get 100% accuracy. That is amazing. That's phenomenal. And if that wasn't impressive enough, this blind analysis actually assumes that law enforcement knows nothing about the crime. They have no idea who, or I should say where, the terrorists plan to attack, or what the method of attack is, or when they plan to attack. They're completely blind to all that information. And yet, I put it up here so you can see it a little easier. And yet, even though law enforcement knows nothing, the test identified 10 out of 12 of the guilty people as guilty, so 83%, and then 100% accuracy with innocence. So not perfect. It could be improved a little bit, but this is still very, very impressive accuracy. Now, the next question that you might be wondering is, out of all the different items that we presented to the participants, the different months and the date of attack and the method of attack, how many of those items, if the law enforcement doesn't actually know, the investigators don't know which items are relevant, then how did the test do at telling them which items were relevant and which ones weren't? So, what about the individual items? Well, if you have 12 participants and you have 3 items each, because there's the location of the attack, the date of the attack, and the method of the attack, that means that there's 36 items total. So if you count all these dots here, you will count 36. Just trust me. And the black dots are crime details, like crime relevant, and then the white dots are crime irrelevant. And then what you're trying to do is see if you can tell the difference between the black dots and the white dots. And you can see there's a lot of overlap here, so it's very difficult. But if you drew a line at about 900 and you called all these black dots crime relevant, then you would actually get there, if you count these up, you would get 21. So you would catch 21 out of 36 items, which is about 60%. So not perfect. It certainly could be improved, but think about it this way. The investigators and law enforcement, they knew nothing going into this interrogation. They didn't know a single thing about which places were going to be attacked, with what method, and when. And so if you can improve, this is a 60% improvement over 0. That's kind of the way you could think about this. So if they apply this procedure, although it's not perfect, it doesn't give them 100% of all the crime details, but it can give them 60%. So definitely better than nothing. That is, when you think about it that way, it is more impressive, because this means that 60% of the cities that were going to be attacked, we now know that they're going to be attacked, or we know what the method of the attack is. So very valuable information for investigators to use. But why should we care? I think this one is a bit more obvious, because obviously we care about national security, and we don't want terrorists to blow up our country. In this case, what this study demonstrated, first and foremost, is that pre-crime is actually possible, right? You can actually know whether someone planned to commit a crime even before they committed it, which is very, very cool. And keep in mind, again, that the guilty people in the study, they were never actually told to memorize anything. So it was completely authentic. Just, they never rehearsed anything. Their brains acquired this information just by sort of living their lives. So very, I keep using the word authentic, but it's more naturalistic than if we had instructed them to do this and had to memorize everything, Now, second, this procedure, this protocol could actually be used in the fancy term as an evidentiary tool for investigators, which all that means is it's a tool that investigators can use to get evidence. So it's not necessarily something that would be used in court and like sending the suspect to prison for the rest of their life. It would be more as like a guiding tool for the investigators, like to help them get leads, essentially. So if they didn't have anything to go on, but all that you had was a suspect and you kind of thought that they might have been involved in a terrorist cell, but you weren't sure, then you could bring them into the police department and hook them up to the electroencephalograph, and then you could get maybe 60% of the information they're trying to hide from you, and that gives you options that gives you some options to pursue leads to pursue and investigate. So this, to be clear, this wouldn't necessarily be used in court or be used to send anyone to prison or jail. It would just be to help them investigate leads. But anyway, that is the gist of it. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it and found it as fascinating as I do. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a good one. So bye for now.